The wind on the west face of Siula Grande wasn't just cold, it felt sharp enough to slice through fabric. Joe Simpson clung to the ice with crampons barely holding, his breath clouding instantly in the thin Andean air. The ridge above him rose in a steep line of ice and broken snow, and every gust of wind pushed him sideways. Far below, the clouds drifted across the glacier and erased the world beneath his feet. Joe drove his axe into the slope, shifted his weight, and felt the ledge under him crumble. He fell before he could shout. The rope snapped tight and slammed him against the face. For a second, his vision blurred white. Then he felt the break, deep, sharp, and sickening. His right leg bent at an angle a human leg wasn't meant to take. Simon Yates, anchored higher on the slope, fought to hold him, driving his own axe deep to arrest the fall. When he reached Joe, the look they exchanged said everything. The climb had ended. Only survival mattered now. Simon rigged a lowering system with numb hands. Joe clipped into the rope, barely conscious from the shock, and braced himself for a descent he knew would be brutal. Simon lowered him in long sections, each drop sending Joe swinging across the ice, smashing into ridges that sent fresh waves of pain tearing up his leg. Snow blew in thick bursts, cutting visibility to almost nothing. Hours passed like this, lower, brace, anchor, repeat, while the storm built around them. Late in the day, the slope changed without warning. Joe felt himself drifting into empty space. The rope jerked, tightening hard against his harness. He was hanging beneath an overhang, suspended in darkness, with no way to climb back up. He tried shouting, but the wind swallowed his voice. Above him, Simon felt the rope drag him down inch by inch. The anchor creaked. Snow cracked beneath his feet. The weight threatened to pull them both off the mountain. Simon held as long as he could. Seconds stretched into something heavier, colder, harder to bear. The wind howled, and the anchor shifted again. He knew he couldn't lift Joe. He knew they would both fall if he didn't act. With no options left, he pulled out his knife and cut the rope. Joe dropped into blackness. He crashed through a snow bridge and tumbled into a crevasse, landing on a slanted block of ice. The impact rattled through his ribs, but he was alive. A pale glow seeped from far above him. The walls rose smooth and steep, impossible to climb in his condition. For a long moment, he lay still, fighting the certainty that this was where he would die. Then he saw the tunnel, narrow, cold, sloping deeper into the mountain. It was the only chance he had. He dragged himself into it, pushing with his elbows, sliding his shattered leg behind him. The ice scraped his hands raw. His breathing echoed in the chamber like distant footsteps. The passage twisted downward, then angled up toward a faint blue light. He clawed at the snow until he broke through and rolled onto the glacier. The world outside was worse than he expected. The cold bit into him instantly, and the pain in his leg pulsed with each heartbeat. He began crawling, measuring progress in inches rather than feet. The glacier stretched in ridges and trenches. He rolled when he could, crawled when he couldn't, dragging himself across the uneven ground while the sun beat down on him in blinding glare. Night brought cold that threatened to stop his heart. He forced himself awake each time he drifted. By the second day, he was dehydrated and hallucinating. Voices called his name. Shadows moved that weren't there. He followed what he hoped was the direction of camp, repeating small goals to keep himself going. Reach that rock, reach that ridge, don't stop. On the third day, he smelled something sharp and familiar, the latrine trench at base camp. He followed the scent, crawling through the scattered rocks until the faint outline of a tent appeared in the dim light. He tried calling out, but only a broken whisper left his throat. He dragged himself the rest of the way. Inside the tent, Simon heard a sound he first mistook for the wind. When he stepped outside and saw Joe crawling toward him, sunburned, skeletal, and barely alive, he froze. The shock of seeing him alive after cutting the rope hit as hard as the cold. They pulled Joe into the tent, wrapped him in dry bags, and gave him water in small sips. He drifted in and out, but he was safe. Joe's condition deteriorated quickly after the initial rescue at camp. His leg had swollen beneath the torn fabric of his climbing pants, so Simon cut the material away to relieve the pressure. The exposed injury showed dark bruising spreading up his calf and thigh. Every shift of his weight sent tremors through his entire body. Despite this, Joe tried to stay awake, terrified that sleep would drag him back into the cold he had barely escaped. Simon boiled snow for water and pressed the warm bottle against Joe's chest to raise his temperature. Throughout the night, Joe drifted between clarity and delirium. He asked the same questions repeatedly, forgetting the answers moments later. At one point, he begged Simon not to cut the rope again, unaware that they were already safe in camp. Simon tried to steady him, though he carried his own guilt, the knowledge that he had severed the line to survive. Joe's presence in the tent was proof he had made the only choice he could, but the weight of that moment hung between them. When the weather cleared, they prepared to move Joe down the mountain. The descent toward the valley was slow and punishing. They rigged another rope system, lowering Joe in stages across the moraine. Each jolt sent pain through him, but he insisted on continuing, knowing rescue teams were days away. Locals from the nearest village eventually assisted with makeshift stretchers woven from branches and packs. The journey to reach medical care took days of coordinated effort across rugged terrain. Doctors later told Joe he was minutes from organ failure when he reached help. Severe dehydration, hypothermia, infection, and trauma had pushed his body beyond its limits. The fact that he had crawled miles with a shattered leg astonished every medical professional who examined him. Recovery took months, yet the story of his survival spread quickly among climbing communities. Joe later returned to Peru to see the mountain again, standing at its base with a stronger sense of what he had endured. The glacier looked smaller than he remembered, but the crevasse fields and jagged walls stirred the same fear he had carried during his crawl. He realized survival had changed him permanently. The thin line between life and death had become something he could measure in feet, in inches, in decisions made under impossible pressure. Standing there, he felt gratitude more than fear. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more true stories of people who faced the impossible and lived to tell it.